world around you must be quiet now, so let my voice keep you company for a while. Let's talk about an ancient story. A story of betrayal, do you believe it? In history, the most lethal betrayals often don't come from your enemy. They come from your most forgiven opponents, your most trusted subordinates, even the one you cherished like your own child. Tonight, the person we're going to talk about, his entire life was spent conquering. He conquered Gaul. He conquered Egypt. He conquered all of Rome. He used clemency to conquer the hearts of his enemies. But ultimately, he failed to conquer the darkest parts of human nature, envy and fear, which finally, at the pinnacle of his power. When he believed he was safe, 23 stads ended his legendary life. And the deepest cut came from the one he least expected, who killed Caesar. Or rather, what killed Caesar in this long story, tonight. March 15th, 44 BC. In Rome, they called it the Ides. What should have been just another ordinary day, a common calendar marker for the full moon, became the date history chose to carve an unhealing wound. The Roman Senate was convening here. An unnatural silence hung in the air. Eyes darted, avoiding contact, and hands, hidden beneath robes tightly gripped. Cold metal, they were waiting for one man, Gaius Julius Caesar, Rome's dictator for life, conqueror of Gaul, arbiter of Egypt, two most powerful man the Republic had ever known. A single word from him could determine the fate of a province. A mere glance could strike fear into the most prominent no. Yet, power is an island, and at its peak, cliffs surround it on all sides. As he approached his seat, a group gathered around him. They were his colleagues, enemies he had pardoned, protégés he had personally evaded, the cherished friend he treated as his own son. Chaos erupts. One man grabs Caesar's purple toga and yanks it down. He signaled to act. Dozens of daggers gleam as they are pulled from beneath robes. Caesar initially fights back, but when he sees a familiar young face in the crowd, he gives up 23 wounds. Legend has it that in his final moments when Caesar saw Marcus Junius Brutus, the young man he had always cherished, raise a dagger, he ceased all resistance. He pulled his toga over his head, calmly extoga over his head. His last words were not a curse upon his assassins, nor a lingering attachment to power, but a heartbroken whisper. You too, my child. What turns a national hero into an enemy of the state? What transforms the closest allies into the deadliest assassins? To understand this world-shattering event and the intricate web of ambition, jealousy, and idealism woven behind it, we must rewind the clock 60 years. Back to a time when nothing was yet set in stone, when a debt-ridden young man from an ancient noble family was preparing to gamble his entire life on Rome itself. On July 12th, 100 BC, as the peak summer sun scorched Rome, the city of 7 hills by the Tiber, a baby boy was born into an ancient, though no longer prominent noble family. His parents named him Gaius Julius Caesar at the time. Caesar wasn't the legendary title it would become. It was just a family surname, and his family, the Julii, were in an awkward position. They were pure patrici, hereditary nobles, whose lineage proudly traced back to the mythical Trojan hero Aeneas. And even the goddess of love, Venus. This divine ancestry was their pride. But in the late Republic was their pride era was more like a dusty old painting on the wall of respected, but not directed convertible. For generations, the Julian family had been politically unremarkable, producing no consuls who could shape state policy, compared to the new elite who amassed immense wealth through wartime plunder or became incredibly rich through commerce and real estate. Caesar's family finances were stretched thin. However, fate laid the groundwork for his life's trajectory through a shrewd political marriage during his youth. His Aunt Julia married a highly controversial but immensely powerful figure in Roman politics. Gaius Marius was a novus homo, new man, meaning none of his ancestors had ever served as consul. He wasn't from a famous family, but his unparalleled military genius and radical army reforms made him Rome's third founder. More importantly, he represented the Populates faction, those who advocated for more land and rights for common citizens through popular assemblies. Naturally, this challenged the fundamental interests of the Optimates, the aristocratic faction centered in the Senate. This marriage firmly bound the ancient Julian family to the Populates cause. It was a risky move at the time, but it undoubtedly opened a door to the heart of power for the young Caesar. He not only became Marius's nephew, but at 16 also married Cornelia, the daughter of another Populates leader, Cinna. This double alliance made him a rising star within the Populates camp, leading to his appointment as a priest of Jupiter. The future seemed bright yet, beneath that light, shadows were growing wildly. Rome, seemingly a great city, was already torn apart by internal conflicts. Nobles against commoners, citizens against allies, creditors against debtors. These tensions were like dry kindling, and the one who lit that spark was the iron-fisted leader of the Optimates and Marius's lifelong rival, Lucius Cornelius Sulla, also a battle-hardened general, firmly believed that Rome's order had to be maintained by the Senate's elite. His power struggle with Marius ultimately erupted into Rome's first large-scale, bloody civil war. In the streets of Rome, legions fought legions, and citizens slaughtered citizens. When Caesar was 17, this long tug-of-war ended. Sulla, after a series of brilliant victories in the east, returned to Rome with his fiercely loyal veteran legions. Marius was dead, the Populates leaderless, and their resistance crumbled. Sulla, an unprecedented political purge began. Sulla invented a brutal and efficient tool called a proscriptio, or proscription. Lists of names were posted in the Roman Forum, and anyone on a list was legally abandoned. Their property was confiscated, bounties were placed on their heads, and anyone who killed them was not only innocent, but rewarded. Even more terrifying, this guilt extended to their descendants, who would be permanently barred from holding public office. Rome was plunged into an unprecedented reign of terror. Informers ran rampant, and acts of vendetta and property seizure were cloaked in the legal guise of preserving the Republic. On this bloody list, as Marius's nephew and Cinna's son-in-law, it was only a matter of time before Caesar's name appeared. Sulla offered the young man a chance. He sent word demanding that Caesar divorce his wife Cornelia to prove his complete break with the Populates. It seemed like a simple choice. On one side, wealth and status. On the other, life itself. Countless young nobles, to save themselves, chose the former without hesitation. However, Caesar, a mere 17-year-old, made a decision that surprised everyone, including Sulla himself. He refused. We can't know exactly what he was thinking. Perhaps it was genuine affection for his wife, or perhaps it stemmed from the inherent pride of the Julian family, which wouldn't allow him to bow to violence. Or perhaps, even in his young mind, there was a political calculation that transcended life and death. Regardless, his refusal in Sulla's eyes was nothing short of self-distrust. He was stripped of his priestly office and his wife's dowry, forced to flee Rome, and began a nomadic exile. He hid in the countryside of the Sabine region, constantly changing his hiding places like a fox hunted by hounds. Once slowed by a fever, He was even captured by Sulla's patrol soldiers. In that life or death moment, Caesar displayed the coolness and cunning that would later make him famous. He bribed the patrol captain with a massive sum of 2 talents, nearly all his money at the time, buying back his lie. Meanwhile in Rome, powerful relatives of the Caesar family, including some Vestal virgins, began to plead on his behalf. They repeatedly visited Sulla, kneeling at his feet, begging for a way out for the foolishly arrogant young man. They emphasized that Caesar was too young to understand the cruelty of polics. Sulla, the dictator who saw through human nature, was initially unmoved, but eventually worn down by their persistent pleas. He seemed to grow annoyed and relented. He agreed to pardon Caesar, but the historians present recorded a warning. He told those pleading for Caesar, "All right, you win. Take him away. But you must understand that in this young man you are so eagerly trying to save today, there lurk many Mariuses." This assessment later proved to be Sulla's most acute insight. He saw through Caesar's calm exterior to the molten ambition simmering beneath. Sulla might have believed that the threat of death would tame this young lion, but he was precisely wrong. This brush with death didn't teach Caesar submission. Instead, it gave him the most important lesson of his life. He understood profoundly that in Rome's colossal arena, laws, traditions, and morals were fragile and useless against raw violence. True power didn't come from divine lineage or popular affection, but from the sword too, one thing that could cut through all chains. He survived, carrying a heart tempered by humiliation and fear. He would never again be a pawn whose fate was controlled by others. Sulla's prophecy, in the years to come, would become reality. Rome's destiny, too, because of this young man's survival, was quietly steered onto a new, unforeseen course. Nencha, do you want to explore more about Caesar's early life, or move on to the next chapter of his rise to power? In 78 BC, the dictator Sulla died. The iron-fisted order he had brutally enforced fractured with his passing. For Caesar, this was a signal, a clear sign that he could safely return to Rome and begin his grand design. When he stepped onto Roman soil again, he was no longer the panic fugitive. His pockets might still have been empty, but his mind was now brimming with a profound understanding of power and a whole new way to play the game. He shrewdly observed that post-Sulla Rome, while seemingly restored to republican order, had actually formed a power vacuum. Old populace leaders were either dead or in exile, and the old optimate nobles were busy carving up Sullivan's political legacy. Meanwhile, the vast Roman populace, after years of civil war and tyrannical rule, desperately craved stability, and even more so, a champion who would speak for them and bring them tangible benefits. Caesar decided he would be that man. His first step was to establish a public image as a righteous avenger. He leveraged the refined rhetorical skills he'd honed during his exile and stepped into Rome's courtrooms. His chosen targets were officials who had grown rich through informing and plundering during Sullan Regé. He first prosecuted Gnaeus Cornelius Dolabella, the former governor of Macedonia, on charges of extortion. Though Dolabella hired the era's top lawyers and was ultimately acquitted, Caesar's courtroom performance electrified all of Rome. His speeches were logically clear and eloquently adorned, at times like a fervent war drum, at others like a sorrowful harp, captivating the emotions of the listening citizens. He lost the case but won a thundering ovation of popular acclaim. People began to see him as the inheritor of Marius's spirit, a brave warrior who dared to challenge the power. Next, he publicly prosecuted another of Sulla's partisans to further refine his oratorical skills. He even traveled to Rhodes, Greece to study under Apollonius Molon, the most renowned rhetoric master of the time. It had said that it was during this voyage that he was kidnapped by a band of Cilician pirates, leading to a truly legendary episode. The pirates demanded a ransom of 20 talents. Caesar burst out laughing, mocking them for not knowing who they had captured. Arrogantly, he declared that someone of his stature was worth at least 50 talents. During the wait for his ransom, Caesar's behavior utterly stunned the pirates. He acted not like a prisoner, but like their master. He do order them to be quiet while he rested. He do recite his own poems and speeches to them. And if the pirates didn't show enough appreciation, he do half-jokingly, half-seriously scold them as illiterate barbarians, promising that once he was released, he would return and crucify every one of them. The pirates just took it as amusing bluster. However, once the 50 talents were delivered and Caesar was freed, he immediately organized a fleet, returned swiftly, and captured the entire pirate crew. And yes, he fulfilled his promise, crucifying them all. Regardless of how much later embellishment this story acquired, it perfectly captures Caesar's character, an extreme arrogance, an iron will, and a chilling, resolute determination to follow through on his word. He borrowed, he took out loans from Rome's wealthiest individuals like Crassus, mortgaging his future political prospects. He seemed utterly unconcerned about bankruptcy, firmly believing that once he attained higher office, all debts would be repaid. With interest, in 69 BC, he was elected quaestor, his first step into the senatorial system. At his Aunt Julia's funeral, he made an astonishing move. In the funeral procession, he openly displayed wax effigies of Marius, which Sulla had forbidden. This was nothing less than a public political declaration. Immediately igniting the fervor of the common people, they shouted Caesar's name, tears streaming down their faces. Caesar, in this highly dramatic fashion, formally took up the mantle of the popular exli in 65 BCA. He was elected aedile. This position, responsible for urban administration and public entertainment, was perfect for Caesar. He elevated the art of spending money to an unparalleled level. In honor of his deceased father, he staged the most lavish gladiatorial show Rome had ever seen. He initially planned for 600 pairs of gladiators, a number that terrified the Senate, forcing them to curtail the scale. Even so, the 320 pairs of gladiators, shimmering in pure silver armor under the sun. He used borrowed money to renovate Rome's public temples and basilicas. He rebuilt the sacred way connecting the Roman Forum to the Capitoline Hill. He organized free banquets and theatrical performances across the city. Overnight, Caesar's name became synonymous with generosity and entertainment. The Roman commoners, those citizens who had little political voice but possessed valuable votes, they adored him, worshipped him, and saw him as one of their own. However, behind this lavish spectacle lay Caesar's snowballing debt. His political enemies gloated, waiting for the day he'd be ruined by his creditors. They mocked him as a showy political bubble built on money. He wasn't investing money, he was investing in people's heart, an all-in gamble. In 63 BC, the position of Pontifex Maximus Isul lifetime, highly prestigious, office overseeing all Roman religious affairs, became vacant. Caesar decided to run. His opponents were two highly respected senatorial elders, far superior to him. This was another seemingly impossible gamble. Caesar once again poured immense sums into bribes. His total debt by this point had reached a staggering one, 300 talents. On the morning of election day, as he kissed his mother Aurelia goodbye, he uttered the words that would go down in history. "Mother, today you will either see your son become Pontifex Maximus, or you will see him become an exile." He left himself no escape. This was an all-in gamble. When the election results came in, the entire Roman elite was stunned. Caesar, with the overwhelming support of the common people, won the election. His vote count in the more distant Roman districts even exceeded the combined total of his two opponents. He had succeeded. He had transformed immense debt into a lifelong, highly prestigious political shield. He proved to everyone that public opinion could be guided, even bought. The old Roman nobles truly began to feel fear. They realized that this young man was playing a political game they had never seen before, that didn't follow the rules. A disruptor had taken his place at Rome's power table, but he knew that popularity and public opinion alone weren't enough. He needed real power, military power, and the next step toward military power was to run for praetor and secure a province where he could command legions. His gaze had already swept beyond the city of Rome, cast toward more distant horizon, anthem from debtor to conqueror. Caesar's Spanish transference point. In 78 BC, the dictator Sulla passed away. The order he had brutally enforced with an iron fist began to crack with his death. For Caesar, this was a signal, and clear indication that he could safely return to Rome and embark on his ambitious plan. When he set foot on Roman soil again, he was no longer the panicked fugitive. His pockets might still have been empty, but his mind was now filled with a profound understanding of power and a completely new playbook. He keenly observed that post-Sulla Rome, while seemingly restored to republican order, had actually developed a power vacuum. The old populace leaders were either dead or in exile, and the old Optimate nobles of the Senate were busy carving up Sullaman political legacy. Meanwhile, the broad Roman populace, having endured years of civil war and terror, desperately craved stability, and even more so, a spokesperson. Caesar decided he would be that person. His first move was to cultivate a public image as a righteous avenger. Leveraging the masterful rhetorical skills he'd honed during his exile, he entered the Roman law courts. He targeted officials who had grown rich through informing and plundering during Sullan regime. He first prosecuted Cnaeus Cornelius Dolabella, the former governor of Macedonia, on charges of extortion. Although Dolabella secured the era's top lawyers for his defense and was ultimately acquitted, Caesar's courtroom performance. His speeches were logically clear and eloquently adorned, at times like a fervent war drum, at others like a sorrowful harp firmly gripping. He lost the case but gained thunderous popular acclaim. People began to view him as the inheritor of Marius's spirit, a brave champion who dared to challenge the powerful. Next, he publicly prosecuted another of Sulla's partisans to further hone his oratorical skills. He even traveled to Rhodes, Greece, to study under Apollonius Molon, the most renowned rhetoric master of the time. It is said that it was during this voyage that he was kidnapped by a band of Cilician pirates, leading to a truly legendary anecdote. The pirates demanded a ransom of 20 talents. Caesar burst out laughing, mocking them for their ignorance of his stature, and claiming that a person of his importance was worth at least 50 talents. During the wait for his ransom, Caesar's behavior utterly astonished the pirates. He acted not like a prisoner, but like their master. He would order the pirates to be quiet when he rested. He would recite his own poetry and speeches to them, and if they didn't show enough appreciation, he would half-jokingly, half-seriously scold them as illiterate barbarians, threatening that once released, the pirates dismissed this as amusing bravado. However, once the 50 talents were delivered and Caesar was freed, he immediately organized a fleet, swiftly returned, and captured the entire pirate crew. And indeed, he made good on his promise, crucifying them all regardless of any later embellishments. This story precisely illustrates Caesar's character, an extreme arrogance, an iron will, and a chilling, decisive resolve to act on his word. The path to power and a transformative encounter. Upon his return to Rome, armed with increased renown and enhanced eloquence, he began his secondary and most critical step, converting popularity into votes. This, however, required to vort ne fori. Caesar's strategy was simple and audacious. He borrowed. He took out loans from Rome's wealthiest individuals, like Crassus, mortgaging his future political prospects. He seemed utterly unconcerned about bankruptcy, firmly believing that once he attained higher office, all debts would be repaid, with interest. In 62 BC, he was successfully elected praetor, a high-ranking position, second only to consul under the Roman system. Praetors, upon completing their term, were eligible to be assigned as governors to a province. This was the opportunity Caesar had long dreamed of. A provincial governor not only commanded the local garrison, but also held a prime position for legally amassing wealth. He could accumulate astonishing riches from local taxes, trade, and even warcy. However, just as he was about to depart for his designated province, Hispania Ulterior, further Spain, his creditors finally blocked his path. They surrounded Caesar's home, declaring they would not allow him to leave Rome until he repaid a portion of his debts. At this crucial moment, Roman wealthiest man, Crassus, once again played the role of angel investor. Crassus wasn't acting out of altruism. He was making a precise political investment. He saw Caesar's immense potential and knew that a rising political star indebted to him could bring substantial returns in the future. Crassus guaranteed Caesar's debts, repaying the most urgent sum of 830 talents, thereby rescuing him. Caesar was finally free to embark on his journey to Spain. Hispania Ulterior, for Romans of that time, was a relatively remote and not fully subdued. While many governors saw this as a nuisance, in Caesar's eyes it was a heaven-sent opportunity. War meant spoils, slaves, and most importantly a stage to build military glory. Upon arriving in Spain, Caesar immediately demonstrated a decisive approach. Instead of passively waiting for tribal raids, he led his army deep into the mountains, striking directly at their strongholds. His tactics were flexible and varied, and his marching speed was astounding. In less than a year, he not only quelled all rebellions, but also extended Roman influence all the way to the Atlantic coast. His soldiers adored him, acclaiming him Imperator, meaning victorious general. Porce, the highest honor Roman soldiers could bestow upon their commander. Through warfare, Caesar amassed vast wealth, enough to repay all his debts and even have a surplus. But it was in Spain that a seemingly incidental encounter led to a spiritual transformation more profound than any financial gain during a tour of the south. He passed through Gades, modern Cadiz, an ancient Phoenician port city. In the city's temple of Hercules, he saw a statue. It wasn't a Roman deity, but a Macedonian. Historical accounts state that Caesar stood before the statue, gazing intently at the conqueror who died young, lost in thought. Suddenly, he sighed deeply, and then tears streamed uncontrollably down his face. His attendants, puzzled, cautiously approached to ask why he was so sorrowful. Caesar replied with an almost ashamed tone, "Do you not think it lamentable that Alexander at my age had already conquered vast territories from Greece to India, becoming the monarch of the known world? And I until today have achieved nothing truly noteworthy." At this point, Caesar was over 30. By Roman standards, this was the prime age for a politician to achieve greatness. He had already served as quaestor, and praetor was a rising political star, and a recently victorious general. Yet, In the face of Alexander's world-conquering legend, Caesar felt that all his achievements seemed utterly insignificant in that moment. It was as if a lightning bolt had pierced the fog within his heart. All his past efforts, courtroom debates, crowd-pleasing performances, unscrupulous elections, had merely been struggles within Roman confined political mire. Alexander, on the other hand, had drawn on the world map with a sword. This was a crushing difference in scale, a vast chasm in the intensity of their lives. Caesar's ambition was infinitely magnified at that instant. He was no longer content with being a successful Roman politician. He wanted to become an immortal legend, like Alexander, revered for 1,000 years. He wanted to conquer, to expand territory, to forever link his name with Rome's greatness. Carrying this redefined, fiercely burning ambition, Caesar impatiently ended his governorship and returned to Rome. He knew that to achieve this magnificent goal, he needed a larger stage, a position that would legally grant him greater military power. And to get it, he needed allies, heavyweight allies who could stand against the entire senatorial establishment. The Uneasy Alliance, Rome's first triumvirate in 60 by A. The political atmosphere in Rome was tense and delicate. The shadows of three giants loomed over the entire Roman Forum. These were the most powerful and ambitious men of their time, yet each faced insurmountable political barriers. The first was Cunius Pompey, the Great. He had just returned triumphant from the east, concluding a long war against Mithridates Vius, establishing new Roman provinces, and forging new alliances. However, upon disbanding his army and returning to Rome as an ordinary citizen, he was met with a cold shoulder from the Senate. The old Optimate nobles, like Cato, the younger, and Lucullus, envied his success and feared his influence. They deliberately stalled, refusing to ratify his arrangements in the east, and rejecting his request to grant land to his demobilized veterans. This left Pompey feeling both furious and humiliated. The second was Marcus Licinius Crassus, a man who had amassed endless wealth through real estate speculation, silver mining, and slave trading during Sulla's era. He was Rome's richest man, rumored to possess more wealth than the entire Roman treasury. He too had a brilliant military record, having crushed the most famous slave revolt in history, led by Spartacus, but his credit for this achievement was diminished by Pompey's intervention. In the eyes of Romans, he remained a shrewd businessman, not a great general like Pompey. He yearned for supreme political honors, commensurate with his wealth, to wash away the taint of money. The third was Caesar, who had just returned from Spain, armed with military glory and wealth. He was preparing to run for consul the following year. He commanded a vast popular base, but the Optimate nobles in the Senate viewed him as a thorn in their side. They saw him as the embodiment of Marius, a potential destabilizer. They would not easily let him ascend to the highest seat of power. These three men were like three equally matched lions, wary of each other and harboring grudges. Pompey looked down on Caesar the Junior, who rose by inciting the populace. Crassus envied Pompey's military accomplishments and had a long-standing feud with him. And Caesar needed the support of both. The Senate's strategy was simple: divide and conquer. Let them balance each other out. Exhaust them so that the Senate's collective authority remained unchallenged. However, they all underestimated Caesar. Caesar, a born political magician, saw an opportunity to converge these three independent streams into a flood, powerful enough to break through any dam. On the first triumvirate, a secret path. He first approached Pompey. He precisely targeted Pompey's pain points, his anger at being humiliated by the Senate, and the urgent need to settle his veterans. Caesar promised him that if Pompey used his prestige to support Caesar's election as consul, The very first thing Caesar would do upon taking office would be to use the full power of the consulship to forcefully pass Pompey's land bill and ratify all his decrees in the ease. Next, he privately met with Crassus. He painted a picture of shared supreme power for the wealthiest man. He promised that he would use his official position to secure more economic benefits for the wealthy businessmen and tax collectors represented by Crassus, known as the Equestrian Order. In return, Crassus would need to use his bottomless treasury to provide unlimited financial support for Caesar's election campaign. Finally, and most challenging, Caesar successfully mediated the long-standing feud between Pompey and Crassus. He eloquently argued to both of them how trivial their personal grievances were in the face of their common enemy, the Senate. But if the three of them united and formed a friendship agreement, amicitia, then the entire political balance of Rome would be under their control. This was a secret, private political alliance, based purely on an exchange of interests. Later historians would call it the First Triumvirate. The Roman historian Livy pessimistically commented that it was a conspiracy against the state's tyranny. It had no legal documents, no public ceremonies, but its power transcended all of the Republic's laws and treatises. The three colossal figures were finally bound together by Caesar with chains of mutual benefit. Pompey offered his military prestige, and Caesar contributed his unparalleled political cunning and popular best new too. Caesar's Rossin. The consular election of 59 BC was a foregone conclusion, driven by the combined might of the three giants. Caesar was elected with an overwhelming majority to counterbalance him. The Senate painstakingly ensured that another conservative noble, Bibulus, was elected as his co-consul, but they would soon discover this was merely a futile jest. A new, unstoppable political force had been born. The fate of the Roman Republic was now firmly held in the hands of these three men, and Caesar, the architect and mastermind of this alliance, was about to begin his true performance. Enter the proconsulship, Caesar's grand design. In 58 BC, Caesar's term as consul concluded. During that year, he had stormed through Roman politics like a bull in a china shop, brutally fulfilling all his promises to his allies. He forcibly passed Pompey's land bill, humiliating. He completely disregarded the Senate's procedures and traditions. Pushing the consular power to its absolute limit, he succeeded. But in doing so, he made countless powerful enemies. The optimate nobles in the Senate loathed him, vowing to prosecute him for endangering the state the moment his term ended. Intending to ruin his reputation, Caesar was well aware of this. He knew that once he reverted to being an ordinary citizen, he would immediately be swallowed by a wave of political enemies. He needed a legal shield, a position that would grant him long-term immunity from prosecution. More importantly, he needed an army completely loyal to him. His experience in Spain had taught him that public opinion was fleeting. Alliances, according to the secret agreement of the First Triumvirate. Caesar secured an unprecedented proconsular appointment. He would simultaneously govern three provinces: Cisalpine Gaul, Transalpine Gaul, and Illyricum, to an extended term of 5 years, meaning he would legally command 4 Roman legions, approximately 20,000 professional soldiers. His gaze turned north of Transalpine Gaul to a vast, mysterious, and unknown land for Romans. There was no unified state, but rather hundreds of fierce, warring Gallic tribes. Romans called it Gallia Comata, long-haired Gaul, a barbaric land filled with primeval forests, swamps, and dangers. For most Roman nobles, it was a place not worth bothering with. But for Caesar, it was the perfect stage to realize his Alexander dream. There were endless wars to fight, countless spoils, and slaves to plunder. And most importantly, it was where he could forge military glory that would surpass Pompey's and become immortal. He would go there to forge a sword sharp enough to cleave the entire Reputerum Nunta Tamentari de Bello Gallico, a masterpiece of propaganda. However, Caesar's expedition from the very beginning was more than just a middlesally planned 8-year-long public relations effort. And the core propaganda material for this campaign was his self-penned military masterpiece, which would later become world-famous, Commentari de Bello Gallico, Commentaries on the Gallic War, Commentarius. In its original Latin means memoirs or reports. This itself was an extremely clever rhetorical device. Caesar did not call his work history or epic, but rather used a seemingly objective, calm, factual report format. This gave his narrative an unquestionable aura of authority from the outset. From 58 BC to 50 BC, Caesar sent a volume of Commentari de Bello Gallico back to Rome for publication each year. This was not written for future historians, but directly for the Roman citizens, senators, and his political enemies of the time. Every word served a clear political purpose. Firstly, he depicted all his military actions as justified and forced. In his writings, every war was not initiated by him, but rather a defensive measure, necessarily undertaken to protect Roman allies and repel barbarian invasions by Gauls or Germans. He fashioned himself as the guardian of Roman civilization, a hero on the northern frontier defending the Republic against chaos and Dana. Secondly, he wrote in the third person, referring to himself as Caesar rather than I. Caesar ordered, Caesar discovered. This he was no longer a mortal with emotions and weaknesses, but a calm, decisive, and always correct symbol of war. This made his victories seem more natural and his decisions more sagacious and divinely inspired. Furthermore, the book was filled with detailed descriptions of the customs and traditions of the Gauls. He meticulously described Gallic Druid beliefs, German tribal customs, and British chariot tactics. These contents made Commentarii de Bello Gallico not just a war report, but more like a fascinating National Geographic magazine, thus reaching a wider readership. Military prose. He used a concise, powerful militament to clearly record the layout of each He never boasted of his achievements, but let cold numbers and facts speak for themselves. He would meticulously detail the troop comparison between friendly and enemy forces, precisely describing how his legions, in desperate situations, turned the tide through strict discipline, and outstanding ingenuation turned the tide for stray. Through this continuous 8-year output of information, Caesar successfully constructed a perfect public persona in the minds of the Roman public. He was an invincible military genius, a great hero who expanded Rome's territory for the state, and a fatherly commander deeply adored by his soldiers. While Pompey enjoyed peace and luxury in Rome, Caesar was enduring hardships with his soldiers in Freezer. While politicians in the Senate were still squabbling over trivial matters, Caesar had already pushed Rome's borders hundreds of kilometers northward. This immense advantage in public opinion was the confidence Caesar relied on when he later dared to challenge the entire senatorial system. His Commentari de Bello Gallico was another war he waged. In 58 BC, a perfect pretext arose the Helvetii tribe. living in what is now Switzerland, decided to undertake a massive collective migration due to pressure from Germanic tribes. They planned to cross Rome's Transalpine Gaul province. Caesar acutely realized his opportunity had arrived. He immediately, under the guise of defending Roman territory and allied security, led his legions to the shores of Lake Geneva. A bloody 8-year conquest was about to begin, and the fate of Rome and the entire Western world would be completely rewritten in this wild land world bent. 4. The Helvetian migration, a pretext for war in 58 BC. The Helvetii migration plan was unprecedented in scale, according to Caesar's own account in commentaries on the Gallic War. They burned their 12 towns and over 400 villages to show their unwavering resolve. Their total numbers reached a staggering 368 people, including 92 warriors capable of bearing arms. Their goal was to migrate to a more fertile and stable land in southwestern Gaul, and the most convenient route there required passing through Roman province of Transalpine Gaul. The Helvetii sent envoys to request Caesar's permission. This was a seemingly reasonable request, but Caesar, a hunter actively seeking a pretext for war, was not about to let this prey slip away in his commentaries. He wrote righteously. He considered the Helvetii past record of defeating and humiliating Roman legions. He also worried that allowing such a massive armed tribe to cross the province would threaten local Roman allies. Therefore, he decisively refused. But this was merely his official rationale for the Roman Senate. His true intentions were revealed by his subsequent actions. After delaying the Helvetian envoys for several days, he used this time to quickly mobilize all available troops in the province and construct a 19-mile-long, 16-foot-high rampart along the Rhone River. When the envoys returned, Caesar stood behind the formidable defenses and coldly declared, "According to the traditions and customs of the Roman people, I cannot permit anyone to pass through our province." Blocked, the Helvetii were forced to choose another more difficult and northerly route, which required passing through the territory of Roman allies, the Aedui tribe. This played right into Caesar's hands. He waited quietly for the Aedui to come asking for aid. Sure enough, when the Helvetii began plundering Aedui lands, desperate Aedui messengers rushed to Caesar's camp. Now Caesar had the perfect, irrefutable justification for war, responding to an ally's request to repel invaders. He was no longer proactively attacking, but forced to retaliate. He immediately led his already mobilized 3 legions and, with astonishing speed, urgently levied 2 new legions from Italy, crossed the Rhone River, and pursued the Helvetii, nean first blood. The Tigurini and Divine Vengeance, Caesar's first target, was a Helvetian subdivision. This was precisely the tribe that had defeated a Roman legion years ago. Under the cover of night, Caesar launched a textbook surprise attack. With most of the Tigurini having already crossed the river and their forces on the bank completely unprepared, Caesar's legions surged into their camp like tigers descending a mountain after a one-sided slaughter. Caesar wrote understatedly in his commentaries, "Whether by divine will or the immortal gods of the Roman people, it was this tribe which had brought such deep disgrace upon the state that first paid this old debt." Vengeance added a profound, sacred hue to his first engagement. The main Helvetian force was stunned by this surprise attack and sent their respected leader, Divico, as an envoy. This Divico was the very old general who had led the Tigurini to defeat the Romans years ago. His conversation with Caesar was fraught with dramatic tension. Divico warned Caesar that the Helvetii fought with courage, not trickery, and advised him not to be overly arrogant. Caesar, however, responded sternly, demanding that the Helvetii provide hostages. Negotiations broke down. War erupted in full. Over the next 2 weeks, Caesar and army engaged in a prolonged pursuit of the main Helvetian force. Caesar displayed his exceptional logistical organization skills, but he also faced a major problem. His Gallic cavalry allies were half-hearted and even leaked intelligence to the enemy. Caesar quickly identified the mastermind, a young Aeduan noble named Dumnorix, and decisively executed him, using an iron fist to deter all wavering allies. Finally, near the town of Bibracte, the moment for decisive battle arraigned. Caesar chose a favorable uphill terrain, arraying his 4 most experienced legions in 3 lines on the hillside. The 2 newly raised legions and all auxiliary troops were positioned on the summit to guard the baggage train. The Helvetii massed all their forces, forming dense phalanxes, and launched a wave-like assault from the front. Neferle, Roman discipline versus Gallic valor. The Battle of Bibracte, the tactical superiority of the Roman legions, was demonstrated vividly in this moment. As the Gauls charged uphill, the first rank of Roman soldiers first hurled their deadly javelins, ir pilum. These specially designed heavy javelins could easily pierce Gallic shields, and their iron heads would bend on impact, preventing the enemy from pulling them out and raising them. A huge shield with a bent javelin embedded in it became heavy and unusable, forcing Gallic warriors to abandon their shields and advance under a hail of projectiles. When the 2 sides engaged in hand-to-hand combat, Roman soldiers drew their short swords, sheer gladius, protected by their large, sturdy shields, scutum. They formed an impenetrable shield wall. Unlike the Gauls' longswords, which were suited for sweeping cuts, the Roman short sword was more effective for efficient stabbing in crowded fortes. The battle lasted from noon until evening. Though the Helvetii were brave, their attacks were repeatedly broken by the precise Roman war machine. Finally, their morale collapsed. However, Caesar gave them no respite. He ordered a full-scale pursuit. The fighting continued within the Helvetian wagon, lager, where their women and children also took up arms to resist. It was not until late at night that the Romans finally captured the Can. This battle was a decisive victory, according to Caesar records, of the 368 Helvetii who had set out, only 130 remained to be sent back to their homes after the battle. Regardless of any exaggeration in these numbers, it sent a clear message to all of Gaul. A new, powerful, and extremely ruthless player had arrived in this land. Ypres, the Germanic threat, and Caesar's masterful leadership. But Caesar's performance was far from over. Soon after he crushed the Helvetes, almost all the Gallic tribal leaders came to congratulate him and requested a general assembly of Gaul. A Germanic tribal chief named Ariovistus, leading his large Suabian army, had crossed the Rhine River, encroached on Gallic lands, and enslaved many Gallic tribes. The Gauls were powerless to resist and implored Caesar, the protector of the Roman people, to expel the Germans for them. This was another heaven-sent opportunity. Caesar once again gained legitimate grounds for intervention. He warned Ariovistus, demanding that he retreat east of the Rhine. Ariovistus's response was filled with Germanic arrogance. He retorted, "By what right do you interfere with my spoils?" War was inevitable. But this time, Caesar's opponent was the Germanic people, who struck fear into all of Gaul. When his soldiers heard they were about to face these tall, fearless German warriors, unprecedented panic erupted in the army, and there were even signs of mutiny. It was in this critical moment that Caesar demonstrated his unparalleled He gathered all his centurions and delivered a speech worthy of historical record. He chastised the soldiers for their cowardice, reminding them of the honor of the Roman legions. Finally, he used a groundbreaking statement that utterly reignited everyone's morale. He said, "If none of you are willing to follow, then I will lead only the 10th Legion, for I am confident that they will never betray me." The 10th Legion was Caesar's most trusted and elite unit. These words were both the highest praise for the 10th Legion and the most severe challenge to the other legions. Soldiers of all legions felt immense shame. They sent representatives to apologize to Caesar, swearing to fight to the death. A brewing mutiny was diffused by Caesar's power of words. With morale restored, the Roman legions marched towards Ariovistus's great Germanic army. On the plains of the Vosges Mountains, the two armies met. In the decisive battle, the Germans' courageous charge initially broke through the Roman legion's left flank. It was at this critical moment that young Publius Crassus, serving as a cavalry commander in the alliance and son of the wealthy Crassus, keenly spotted an opportunity. He proactively led the reserves to outflank the enemy, stabilized the line, and ultimately turned the tide of the battle. The great Germanic army was utterly routed. Ariovistus fled disgracefully back across the Rhine. In just one summer, Caesar had successively defeated Gaul's two most feared enemies, Nusae Helvetii, and the Germans. His renown spread like wildfire throughout Gaul. He was no longer merely a Roman provincial governor. He had become the arbiter of Gaul's entire destiny. Frat. The Gallic campaigns. Year 2 and the Belgic War. In 57 BC, Caesar embarked on his second year in Gaul. His spectacular victories from the previous year had not brought true peace. Instead, they were like a massive stone cast into a pond, sending ripples throughout all of Gaul. The Belgic tribes to the north, renowned for their fierce fighting prowess, were profoundly unsettled by the rapid Roman expansion. They believed that after crushing the Helvetii and the Germans, Caesar's next target would undoubtedly be them. Consequently, a vast Belgic military alliance formed, gathering an army of nearly 300 to fight the Romans to the death. Caesar, as always, portrayed this threat as an active aggression against Rome. He once again advanced northward with his 8 legions, using the rationale of a preemptive strike on the banks of the river Aes. Caesar cognate his genius as a military engineer. Instead of engaging an enemy several times his size in a direct confrontation, he chose an excellent defensive position on the riverbank and immediately ordered his soldiers to construct a model Roman camp. The camp was backed by the river, protected by marshes on both flanks, and fronted by wide ditches. He also innovatively built bridgeheads on the shallow crossings at both ends of the river, deploying catapults and archers. This camp, like an impregnable fortress, completely neutralized the Belgic numerical advantage. Several attempts to cross the river added. Caesar seized this rare opportunity, immediately launching a pursuit to cut off and annihilate the retreating enemy. He defeated the Belgic tribes one by one. Among these, the fiercest battle was against the most unyielding tribe. The Nervi set up an ingenious ambush. As the Roman legions were making camp by the river Sambre, their formation not yet fully deployed, the Nervii burst from the forest, catching the Romans completely by surprise. The battle was exceptionally brutal. The Roman left wing and center were embroiled in desperate fighting, and even Caesar's most elite 10th Legion was forced to retreat. Communications within the army were momentarily cut off, standards were captured, and centurions suffered heavy chasm. In the direst moment, Caesar once again displayed his astonishing courage. As a commander, He did not remain behind to direct, but seized a shield from a guard and personally rushed. He loudly called out the centurions' names, encouraged the soldiers to hold their ground, and ordered them to form a circular defensive position. Caesar's appearance was like a potent stimulant, instantly stabilizing the faltering morale. Seeing their commander fighting alongside them, the soldiers' courage surged. Finally, timely reinforcements arrived, attacking from both sides and ultimately annihilating the brave Nervii. Caesar wrote in his commentaries, with no small admiration, that after this battle, only 500 of the 60 Nervian warriors remained. He submitted an overwhelmingly glorious battle report to the Roman Senate. Although the Senate harbored resentment towards him, faced with his immense achievements, they were forced to grant him an unprecedented 15-day public Thanksgiving celebration, an honor even Pompey had never enjoyed. In 56 BC, while Caesar was in Italy handling political affairs and holding the conference of Lucca with Pompey and Crassus to renew the triumvirate, the coastal tribes of western Gaul, led by the Veneti, launched a rebellion. The Veneti were exceptional seafarers, possessing a powerful fleet with robust oak ships, capable of withstanding the huge waves of the Atlantic. Most of their towns were built on coastal cliffs or peninsulas, making them easy to defend and difficult to attack. The Roman legion's land advantage was completely negated against them. Facing this new challenge, Caesar once again demonstrated his astonishing adaptability. He ordered the construction of a brand new Roman fleet from scratch on the Loire River. Simultaneously, he invented a specialized weapon to counter the Veneti ships, an extremely sharp sickle mounted on a long pole. The decisive battle unfolded on the waters south of Brittany. The Veneti ships were tall and sturdy, and Roman warships could not destroy them with traditional ramming tactics. It was then that Caesar's secret weapon came into play. Roman soldiers, using their long-poled sickles, vigorously hooked and cut the halyards of the Veneti's sailing ship, deprived of their sails. The Veneti ships immediately became cumbersome logs floating aimlessly at sea. Roman warships then swarmed them, and soldiers leaped onto the enemy vessels, turning the naval battle into the land-based boarding action they excelled at. The Veneti fleet was completely annihilated. To punish this rebellion, Caesar ordered the execution of all Veneti elders and sold the remaining population into slavery with brutal means. He warned all Gauls of the consequences of betrayal. His motivation was no longer mere military necessity, but a pure desire to make history and build an immortal personal reputation. In 55 BC, two Germanic tribes crossed the Rhine into Gaul. After defeating them, Caesar made a decision that shocked all of Rome. The Rhine River was swift and wide, and building a bridge across it seemed an impossible engineering feat at the time. However, Caesar's legionary engineers once again performed a miracle. In just 10 days, they constructed a sturdy timber pile bridge across the Rhine. When the Roman legions marched in disciplined formation, they could not comprehend how the Romans had accomplished this feat. Caesar conducted an armed patrol in Germanic territory for 18 days, accepted the submission of several tribes, then calmly returned and dismantled the bridge. The military significance of this action was almost nil, but its political and psychic one. The Roman legions could go wherever they pleased. No natural barrier could stop them. He was not just waging war, he was putting on a performance, shooting the limits of Roman power to the citizens and senators of Rome. The climax of this performance occurred in the same year. After resolving the Germanic threat, Caesar, using the pretext that the Britons had aided Gallic rebellions, decided to launch an expedition. For Romans, Britain was like the end of the world. Everything there was filled with legend, and the unknown Caesar assembled 2 legions, boarded 80 transport ships, and crossed the English Channel. This landing operation was exceptional de parade. The Britons were already arrayed on the beaches, horses and 2-wheeled chariots, galloping along the shore. Roman soldiers, unable to bring their ships close to shore, had to wade through chest-deep water, carrying heavy equipment to launch their attack on the beach. Many soldiers hesitate at a critical moment. A standard bearer of the 10th Legion, holding high the Legion's eagle standard, delivered an impassioned speech, then was the first to leap into the sea and charge towards the enemy lines. Inspired by his bravery, the Roman soldiers surged forward and successfully landed. Caesar's first expedition to Britain was more like an armed reconnaissance. He fought a few skirmishes with local tribes, but was soon forced to return to Gaul due to a storm, damaging his fleet and the approach of Winningen, although militarily limited in its outcome. Caesar was the first Roman to lead an army across the ocean and set foot on that legendary land. His prestige, at this moment, reached its peak, even surpassing Alexander. Because Alexander had never led a naval expedition, the Senate once again granted him a 20-day Thanksgiving celebration. He was no longer just a general. He was an explorer, a pioneer of civilization. However, as he reveled in supreme glory, a true storm, sweeping across all of Gaul, was quietly brewing. Ian said, "Would you like to delve into the storm brewing in Gaul, or perhaps explore the political repercussions back in Rome during Caesar's campaigns?" Years of hardship and the rise of Vercingetorix, 54 to 53 BC, were difficult years for Caesar. His alliance was quietly crumbling in the distant east. Crassus, Rome's wealthiest man, in pursuit of military glory comparable to Pompey and Caesar, rashly launched an expedition against the Parthian Empire. The result was an unprecedented Roman defeat at the Battle of Carrhae. Crassus himself was captured and killed, and the 7 legions he led were annihilated. Rome's proud eagle standards fell into the hands of its archenemy. Crassus's death meant that one corner of the stable, first triumvirate triangle, had collapsed. There was no longer a buffer between Caesar and Pompey. Simultaneously, Caesar's beloved daughter, Julia, crucial emotional link between him and Pompey, died in childbirth. This double rupture of political alliance and family ties caused suspicion and animosity between Caesar and Pompey. Dispersed meanwhile in Gaul, an unprecedented disaster. In the winter of 54 BC, due to drought and crop failure, Caesar was forced to disperse his 8 legions into different regions of northern Gaul for winter quarters. This was a fatal mistake. The Gauls saw the Roman legions' vulnerability when separated, and the flames of rebellion were rekindled. A meticulously planned ambush, orchestrated by Ambiorix, chief of the Eburones, lured 1.5 Roman legions, nearly 10,000 soldiers, into a valley and annihilated them. This was Caesar's first major defeat in Gaul. Immediately afterward, another rebel army led by the Nervii surrounded the winter camp of another legion, commanded by Quintus Cicero. News reached Caesar, who was away, and he was consumed with anxiety. With astonishing speed, he gathered 2 nearby legions, only 7,000 men, and rushed to their aid. He faced 60,000 rebels. In this battle of vastly unequal forces, Caesar once again demonstrated his cunning. He deliberately feigned weakness, building a very small camp to lure the enemy into attacking. When the Gauls abandoned their siege advantage and charged chaotically towards Caesar's small camp, Caesar ordered a full-scale sortie, decisively routing an enemy several times his size. Although Caesar quelled this crisis, the seeds of defeat had been sown. For the first time, the Gauls realized that the Roman legions were not invincible. More importantly, they needed a unified leader to coordinate the actions of all tribes. This leader soon emerged. His name was Vercingetorix. He was tall, possessed great personal charisma, and was a gifted orator. He profoundly understood that the Gauls' previous failures stemmed from their fragmented efforts. He traveled tirelessly, calling on all tribes to cast aside old grievance and unite to drive the Romans completely out of Gaul. For their common freedom, in 52 BC, at a secret forest assembly, Vercingetorix was a looms, the largest uprising in Gallic history, sweeping across the entire region, officially began. The rebels first massacred all Roman merchants and citizens in the city of Sulla. The news spread throughout Gaul, signaling a full-scale war. At this time, Caesar was in Cisalpine Gaul, handling affairs, and he and his main legions. Vercingetorix's strategy was clear and deadly. He would employ a scorched earth policy, burn all towns, villages, and provisions, leaving no supplies for the Romans, and wear down the Roman legions with hunger. Simultaneously, he would use the advantage of Gallic cavalry to constantly harass Caesar's supply lines. Caesar faced the most severe test of his life. He had to cross the snow-covered Cevennes mountains in winter to rendezvous with his legions. He led his troops, carving out a 6-foot-deep snowpath, and appeared unexpectedly in the heartland of the Arverni. This move forced Vercingetorix to fall back and gave Caesar precious time to successfully link up with his main legions, scattered across the region. After the rendezvous, Caesar immediately launched a counterattack, besieging the wealthy city of Avaricum, which Vercingetorix had ordered to be spared. Although Vercingetorix continuously harassed them from outside, the Roman legions, with their unparalleled engineering capabilities, built a massive siege ramp 330 feet wide and 80 feet high in 25 days. Finally capturing the city, all 40,000 inhabitants were massacred. However, in the subsequent Battle of Gergovia, while besieging the strongly fortified hill town, Vercingetorix's homeland, the Roman legion's attack was repulsed due to the rashness and command errors of his subordinates, losing nearly 700 soldiers and 46 centurions. This was Caesar's first defeat in the Gallic Wars under his direct commandus. Even the Aedui, who had previously been loyal to Rome, defected to the rebels. Caesar's situation became unprecedentedly isolated and dangerous. All his supply lines were cut, and all of Gaul became his enemy during the retreat. Vercingetorix attempted to completely annihilate Caesar's main force in a decisive cavalry battle. However, Caesar's hired Germanic cavalry played a crucial role. Routing the Gallic cavalry, Vercingetorix was forced to retreat with his 80,000-strong army to a strongly fortified hill town called Alesia. Caesar realized this might be his last chance to achieve a decisive victory. He made a decision that can only be described as insane. Ennaba, the Siege of Alesia, a masterpiece of military engineering. The Siege of Alesia is one of the greatest and most incredible sieges in world military history. Caesar, the military engineer, would here stage his most brilliant mass than 60,000 were to besiege 80,000 enemy troops inside the city. He ordered the construction of a siege circumvallation, 11 Roman miles, about 16 kilometers, long around the hill of Alesia. This fortification, known as the Inner Circumvallation, included towering ramparts, 2 wide ditches, countless watchtowers, and various deadly traps, sharpened wooden stakes, caltrops, and mine-like. Halfway through the construction, Vercingetorix sent out all his cavalry, breaking through the lines under cover of night to seek reinforcements from across Gaul. Caesar knew this meant that, in the near future, he would face not only the 80,000 enemy troops inside the city, but also an unprecedentedly large relief army. Facing this desperate situation of being attacked from both front and rear, Caesar's response defied all expectations. He ordered the construction of an even larger, stronger outer circumvallation, facing outwards beyond the inner one. This outer circumvallation stretched 14 Roman miles, about 21 kilometers, stripped the Roman legions, built two parallel, impregnable defensive lines. They enclosed themselves between these two lines. They were both besiegers, and besieged soon. Relief forces from all over Gaul arrived, numbering, according to Caesar, up to 250 infantry and 8 cavalry. They launched a fierce assault on the Roman lines from the outside. Simultaneously, Vercingetorix led his troops out of the city, coordinating with the relief forces to attack the inner circumvalles. The moment of decisive battle arrived. Caesar's 60,000 troops were caught between over 300 Gauls attacking from both inside and outside. The battle raged simultaneously. Shouts, horn blasts, and the clash of weapons echoed through the valley. Caesar, the commander-in-chief, galloped back and forth between the two defensive lines, appearing wherever a crisis emerged. His crimson commander's cloak became a striking, morale-boosting banner on the battle. The battle continued for several days. The Roman lines teetered on the brink of collapse multiple times. At the most critical juncture, the Gallic relief army concentrated its forces and breached a weak point in the outer circumvallation. Caesar personally led the reserves and deployed his Germanic cavalry, launching a deadly countercharge from the enemy's rear and flank. This counterattack was the final straw. The Gallic relief army's lines completely collapsed. Soldiers scattered in panic, trampling each other, pursued by Roman cavalry. Vercingetorix, witnessing the disastrous defeat of the relief forces from within the city, knew that all was lost. The next day, Vercingetorix, the brave Gallic leader, put on his most magnificent armor, mounted his war horse, and rode alone to Caesar's camp. He solemnly placed his weapons at Caesar's feet, then quietly sat down, marking his surrender and the end of the entire Gallic uprising. The Battle of Alesia was the pinnacle of Caesar's military command. He achieved victory against superior forces in seemingly impulsive triumph. Over the next 2 years, Caesar mopped up the remaining resistance. His conquest of Gaul came at a tremendous cost. It is estimated that 800 towns were destroyed. 1 million Gauls were killed, and another 1 million were sold into slavery. An independent civilization was extinguished, but for Caesar personally, he had achieved his goals. He possessed an invincible army, victorious in countless battles, and absolutely loyal to him. He had acquired astonishing wealth enough to buy all of Rome. He had built immortal military glory that surpassed Pompey's and even that of any Roman general in his pay, now the conqueror of Gaul, with his army and his power. Capable of ogrening everything, was about to turn his gaze back to the city that awaited him and feared him, Rome, the death knell of the Republic. Enter the gathering storm. Caesar versus Pompey. As Caesar fought in the mud and blood of Gaul, the political climate in Rome was brewing in a way that became increasingly unfavorable to him. Crassus's death completely shattered the balance of power among the triumvirs. Now on the Roman stage, only two protagonists remained. Caesar, who had forged immense military glory in Gaul and commanded 8 battle-hardened legions, and Pompey, who had stayed in Rome, was gradually drawn in by the Senate and also commanded significant prestige and an army, once father-in-law, and son-in-law, once allies. They now stood as opposing kings on Rome's political chessboard, separated by the lines of fate. Pompey, the great general, initially might not have intended to become Caesar's adversary, but remaining in Rome, enjoying the capital's reverence, he gradually became the sole hope for the Senate's conservative nobles to counter Caesar. Led by Cato the Younger, the Optimate tradition, and Caesar's sworn enemies, they constantly whispered in Pompey's ear, exaggerating Caesar's ambition and portraying him as a dictator poised to subvert the Republic under their machinations. Pompey was granted the unprecedented position as sole consul, ostensibly to restore order in Rome, but effectively consolidating all power in his hands. He began enacting a series of laws, targeting Caesar, for example, requiring provincial governors to wait a period as private citizens in Rome after their term before being eligible to run for public office. Again, this was a fatal blow to Caesar because once he relinquished his governorship of Gaul, surrendered his military command, and without the protection of his army, his fate was easily imagined. Caesar was not without attempts at compromise. Through his tribunes, Curio and Antony, he proposed a series of reconciliation plans to the Roman Senate. His core demand was to be allowed to run for conun in absentia, that is, to run for office while retaining his governorship of Gaul and military command, ensuring a seamless transition of power. He even proposed a daring idea. Both he and Pompey could simultaneously surrender their military commands, returning their armies to the state. This proposal won overwhelming 22. This indicated that most senators feared both Caesar and Pompey, and what they truly desired was peace. However, this proposal was flatly rejected by Pompey and the hardline nobles. They saw through it as Caesar's political maneuver, because Caesar's army was far away, and if they were truly to disband simultaneously, Pompey could clearly remobilize faster. Atna, crossing the Rubicon. The die is cast. On January 1, 49 B, with Pompey's tacit approval and the urging of the hardliners, the Senate passed a final resolution, declaring Caesar an enemy of the state. Hostis, they ordered Caesar to unconditionally disband his army by a specified date and return to Rome as a private citizen to face trial. They also granted Pompey ultimate power to defend the Republic. The news carried by the exiled tribune Antony swiftly reached Caesar in Ravenna. Ravenna was a border city of Cisalpine Gaul. To its south, a small, unremarkable river flowed quietly. Its name was the Rubicon. According to Roman law, no general was permitted to lead an army across the Rubicon into Italy proper without the Senate's permission. Crossing this river meant an open declaration of war against the Republic on the night of January 10, 49 BC. History stood at a crossroads. Caesar, with his most loyal 13th Legion, he paused, gazing intently at the not-so-wide river before him. On the other side lay Italy, Rome, his familiar homeland, but at this moment it also represented an irreversible destiny. He deeply understood the weight of this step. To cross meant to bear the stigma of a traitor, to drag all of Rome into an unpredictable civil war, with countless citizens bleeding and dying for it. Not to cross meant to abandon everything he had gained with blood and sweat over 8 years. To return to Rome, to be butchered by his political enemies, and ultimately die in Humis. The historian Suetonius recounts the dramatic scene of this moment. Caesar said to his generals beside him, "But once we cross this little bridge, everything will be decided by the sword." It is said that as he hesitated, a tall, mysterious piper suddenly appeared. He played a stirring military tune, drawing the soldiers' attention. Then he snatched a trumpet from a bugler, blew a loud call to advance, and strode purposefully across the bridge. Caesar interpreted this as an omen from the gods. He famously cried out the immortal words Alia iacta est. The die is cast. BG. As the words, "the die is cast," are spoken, a grand and tragic symphony are spoken, a drums beating in unison, as if the floodgates of fate have been completely opened. Narrator. He spurred his horse, the first to cross the Rubicon. The soldiers of the 13th Legion followed closely behind. They knew they were no longer following a governor of the Roman Republic, but a rebel leader declaring war on the entire system. But they didn't care. 8 years of fighting side by side had long made them see Caesar as their father and their god. Caesar's will was their will. Civil war had officially begun. News of this reached Rome, triggering immense panic. The Optimate nobles in the Senate, including Pompey, had completely underestimated how swift and decisive Caesar's action. They had assumed Caesar would first gather all his legions in Gaul, which would take at least several months. They utterly underestimated Caesar's speed and resolve. Pompey, once a god of war, now appeared indecisive. He told the senators he had 10 legions in Italy, and if he merely stamped his foot, soldiers would spring from the ground. However, this was mere bravado. His army consisted mostly of new recruits, and was scattered, utterly unable to contend with Caesar's seasoned, battle-hardened legions, forged in the crucible of Gaul. More importantly, the hearts of the Italian people had long since swayed towards Caesar. After crossing the river, Caesar did not engage in any massacres or acts of revenge. He advanced southward as a liberator. Cities along the route in Italy almost surrendered at sight, opening their gates to welcome him. Even the armies sent to obstruct him defected and joined his ranks under immense fear. Pompey and the Optimate nobles made a hasty and ignominious decision: abandon Rome, retreat south, and ultimately cross the Adriatic Sea to flee to Greece. They hoped to use the resources and naval superiority of the East to remobilize their forces and then face Caesar in a decisive battle. In just 60 days, Caesar occupied the entire Italian peninsula without shedding a drop of blood. He entered the abandoned capital, Rome. He stood in the Senate House, facing the few remaining senators, and delivered a speech. He declared that he was the true defender of the Republic, and he was forced to take up arms only to protect the trampled rights. He opened Rome's treasury, using its gold and silver as funds for his war. When a tribune attempted to stop him, Caesar, hand on his sword hilt, coldly told him, "Young man, for me saying this and doing this are equally easy." The tribune, intimidated, backed away. Repeated at this moment, Caesar no longer needed any pretense. He showed through his actions who truly held power in Rome. However, he did not revel in victory. He knew Pompey's main forces were still intact, and the enemy controlled naval supremacy in the Mediterranean. Before pursuing Pompey, he first had to resolve a lingering concern. Pompey still had 7 elite legions stationed in Spain. Caesar left Antony to guard Italy, and then led his army to Spain. He was about to stage a brilliant campaign of maneuver, demonstrating to the world that his military genius was not limited to the battlefield. He uttered a famous saying, "I am going to Spain to attack an army without a general. Then, I shall go to attack a general without an army." The Spanish campaign, a triumph of strategy. Caesar's strategic thinking was as clear as a surgeon's scalpel. He knew that Pompey's naval superiority in the east meant he couldn't immediately cross the sea in pursuit. If he rashly went to Greece, the 7 legions stationed in Spain, led by Pompey's most experienced generals, could at any moment attack him from behind. Therefore, he had to deal with the Western threat first. His famous quote, "To attack an army without a general, and then a general without an army," precisely summarized his plan. In the spring of 49 BC, Caesar led his 6 elite legions towards Spain. The city of Massilia, Marseille. This ancient Greek colony declared neutrality in the Civil War, but closed its gates to Caesar while opening its port to Pompey's fleet. Caesar could not tolerate such a potential threat in his rear. He left 3 legions to besiege Massilia, while he himself led the main force to cross the Pyrenees Mountains and march into Spain. In Spain, Pompey's 3 lieutenants, Afranius, Petreius, and Varro, awaited him. They jointly commanded 7 legions, far outnumbering Caesar's forces. They adopted the correct strategy: avoid a pitched battle in the open field with Caesar's seasoned veterans, and instead, relying on fortified camps and superior logistics, try to wear down Caesar's army. The 2 sides engaged in a brilliant campaign of maneuver, lasting 40 days in the northeastern Spanish region of Ilerda. This was no longer a large-scale pitched battle like those in the Gallic Wars, but a contest of logistics, engineering, and psychology. Initially, the situation was extremely unfavorable for Caesar. A sudden spring flood washed away 2 bridges near his camp, completely cutting off his supply lines. His army faced starvation, while Pompey's army watched them hunger from their camps on the opposite bank. At their leisure, Pompey's generals even sent triumphant dispatches to the Senate in Rome, claiming Caesar was trapped. However, they underestimated Caesar and his engineers. Caesar ordered the construction of a fleet of light transport boats, modeled after those he had seen in Britain, made of leather and light wood. Using these boats, he stealthily ferried a legion to the opposite bank, established a new bridgehead, and quickly repaired the bridgehead. He did not directly attack the enemy's fortified camps, but through a series of dazzling feints and forced marches, successfully outflanked the enemy, cutting off their access to their main granary. Now the tables had turned. It was Pompey's army that faced starvation. Afranius and Petreius attempted to retreat south with their forces to find new supplies. But Caesar's legions, like relentless wolves, constantly clung to their heels. Caesar's soldiers even dug trenches and built ramparts while marching to impede and encircle the enemy. Finally, on a scorching summer day, Pompey's 70-strong army, in a desperate situation, without water or food, was completely surrounded by Caesar's forces. Yet, Caesar again made an unexpected decision. He did not order a massacre. When the desperate Pompeian soldiers emerged from their camp to speak with Caesar's soldiers, even greeting them as brothers, Caesar did not stop them. When the enemy generals requested negotiation, Caesar agreed. His terms were exceptionally lenient if they disbanded their armies. In just 49 days, Caesar, without shedding a drop of blood, caused the 7 legions in Spain to disintegrate. He won this war by using clemency and forgiveness as his most powerful psychological weapons. This victory fully demonstrated his military philosophy. The highest form of warfare is not to destroy the enemy. Having dealt with the threat in the west, Caesar could finally, without reservation, turn his gaze to the east, to his ultimate rival. Pompey, the decisive clash. Pharsalus. While Caesar was achieving brilliant victories in Spain and Massilia, Pompey had assembled a formidable army in Greece. He commanded 9 Roman legions, tens of thousands of auxiliary troops, and elite cavalry from various allied kingdoms in the east. His fleet firmly controlled the Adriatic Sea, blockading all ports. To all observers, Pompey held the winning hand, merely waiting for Caesar to come to his doom in early 48 Baecia. In winter, risking enormous storms and interception, he led his first contingent of 7 legions, just 15,000 men, successfully evading Pompey's naval blockade and forcibly landing on the western coast of Greece at Pallias. This was an extremely dangerous gamble. He placed himself in a deep penetration with an isolated force, with subsequent reinforcements. Over the next few months, the two sides engaged in a prolonged medicinal standoff near the important Greek town of Dyrrhachium. Similar to the siege of Alesia, Caesar attempted to encircle Pompey's legions, which outnumbered his by 2 to 1. By constructing circumvallations, however, this time he could not retarcally the miracle of Alesia. Pompey, relying on his naval superiority, had ample supplies. It was Caesar's army, due to lack of provisions, that faced starvation. Ultimately, Pompey launched a successful surprise attack, breaching Caesar's defenses and inflicting significant losses on Caesar's army. This was the first time Caesar had been defeated by Pompey on a direct battlefield. This victory filled the senators and nobles in Pompey's camp with elation. They urged Pompey to press his advantage and annihilate Caesar. Pompey, a cautious general, had initially intended to wear down Caesar with a war of attrition, but under the encouragement and flattery of his peers, he too grew overconfident and finally decided to seek a decisive battle. Caesar, after his defeat at Dyrrhachium, decisively retreated inland to the plains of Thessaly. He needed an open battlefield to utilize the fighting prowess of his veterans, and also to find provisions for his army. Pompey, with his large army, pursued Relender Greece, called Pharsalus. This was their fateful end. Pompey's army held a clear numerical advantage. He had approximately 45,000 infantry, while Caesar had only 22,000, especially in cavalry. Pompey possessed 7,000 elite horsemen, while Caesar had fewer than 1,000 before the battle. The nobles had already begun arguing over post-war offices and property distribution. They had even prepared shackles for Caesar. In Caesar's camp, however, there was a solemn atmosphere. Caesar personally inspected his soldiers, reminded them of their glory over the past 9 years, and told them that this battle would decide everything. The battle began. Pompey's plan was simple: use his superior infantry to pin Caesar's legions in the center, then have his powerful 7,000 cavalry like a hammer smash Caesar's weak right flank and outflank his rear. This was a textbook, seemingly unbreakable tactic. Caesar saw through Pompey's intention. He made a brilliant tactical deployment that would change world history. Behind his right-wing cavalry, he quietly concealed a fourth line, consisting of 6 elite infantry cohorts, approximately 3,000 men. He personally gave this unit orders: do not throw your javelins, but use them like spears, thrusting upwards, directly at the faces of the enemy. Pompey's 7,000 cavalry, like a torrent of steel, charged. They easily routed Caesar's numerically inferior cavalry, then triumphantly wheeled around to strike Caesar's infantry flank and rear. They believed victory was at hand. It was at this moment that Caesar ordered the fourth line to attack. These 3,000 veterans suddenly surged out from behind the lines without hesitation. Pompey's cavalry, composed of Roman nobles who prized their appearance, had never encountered such a terrifying tactic. Faced with countless spear tips aimed at their eyes and faces, they fell into immense panic. Their formations shattered, and they fled the battlefield. Pompey's most lethal hammer was thus instantly shattered by Caesar's precise surgical strike. Immediately afterward, Caesar's fourth line, without stopping, outflanked Pompey's infantry legions, who were still struggling on the front line. Simultaneously, Caesar committed his last reserve to third line Pompey's legions. Struck simultaneously from the front, flank, and rear, instantly collapsed. Pompey, the great general, stared blankly as his army disintegrated, seemingly unable to believe what was unfolding before him. Dispirited, he returned to his camp, shed his general's armor, then mounted a horse and frantically fled the battle. The Battle of Pharsalus ended with a resounding, incredible, and complete victory for Caesar. With 22,000 men, he routed 45,000. Pompey's army suffered devastating losses, while Caesar's own losses, according to his accounts, were less than 200 men. Nutstimer, the end of an era and Caesar's letic. Pompey, once Caesar's rival, as a Roman giant, saw his lifetime of glory. He fled to Egypt, hoping for protection from the Egyptian king. However, what awaited him was not an ally's hand, but a treacherous blade to appease the pursuing Caesar. The Egyptian court officials murdered Pompey and presented his head as a gift to Caesar. Legend has it that when Caesar saw the severed head of his former ally and son-in-law, instead he turned away and wept. Perhaps it was out of pity for this once great hero, or perhaps it was sadness for the complete end of an era. Pompey's death did not immediately end the civil war. Caesar became entangled in the Ptolemaic dynastic conflict in Egypt, helping the famous Cleopatra VII ascend to the throne. Then, with lightning speed, he defeated King Pharsalus to Pontus at the Battle of Zala in Asia Minor, sending back the famous three-word dispatch to Rome: Veni, Vidi, Vici. I came, I saw, I conquered. Finally, he cleared out the last remnants of the senatorial faction, led by Cato the Younger and Bomba in Spain. In 45 BC, after nearly 5 years of brutal civil war, Caesar finally returned to Rome as the undisputed victor. All enemies of the Republic had been eliminated. Now the entire Roman world lay prostrate at his feet. The Senate, the very institution that had once declared him an enemy of the state, now vied to bestow upon him unprecedented honors. He was granted the Pater Patriae, father of the country pew. He received the dictatorship for 10 consecutive years, and finally, in 44 BC, he was granted the title of Dictator Perpetuo, dictator in perpetuity. This meant his power was no longer subject to any term limits. It was absolute and lifelong. The Roman Republic, while nominally still in existence, had in essence become a one-man state. Caesar held 4 consecutive, unprecedentedly grand triumphs, celebrating his victories over Gaul, Egypt, Pontus, and Numidia. During weeks of celebration, Roman citizens enjoyed free banquets, watched lavish gladiatorial shows featuring captives and exotic beasts, and even mock naval battles. Caesar generously distributed hundreds of millions of coins plundered from the wars to his soldiers. After gaining absolute power, he immediately began to perform a drastic surgical reform on the ailing, crumbling republic with astonishing efficiency. The first issue he tackled was Rome's persistent debt problem. He did not, as some radicals demanded, completely abolish all debts. Instead, he adopted a more moderate and pragmatic solution. He ordered a re-evaluation of all assets' values and stipulated that interest could not exceed the principal, and already paid interest could be deducted from the principal. This solution both appeased indebted commoners and protected the fundamental interests of creditors, settle his hundreds of thousands of veteran soldiers, and alleviate Rome's overcrowded population. He established numerous new colonies in Italy. Soldiers. Over 80,000 Roman citizens were relocated to these new homes, including Carthage and Corinth, two ancient cities that Rome had previously razed to the ground. This not only resolved social issues, but also greatly promoted the spread of Roman culture throughout the Mediterranean. The Roman calendar at the time, due to arbitrary modifications by the high priests, was months out of sync with the actual seasons. Caesar assembled the team of experts led by the Egyptian astronomer Vercingetorix and redesigned a new calendar based on the solar year. He stipulated that a year would have 365 days to compensate for past errors. 46 BC was unprecedentedly extended to 445 days. This calendar became the precursor to our modern Gregorian calendar, Julian calendar. Furthermore, he standardized the municipal administration system across the Italian peninsula. He vigorously undertook public works, such as new forums, temples, and libraries. He strictly limited the import and use of luxury goods. He even planned to dig the Corinth Canal and drain the marshes near Rome. In just over a year, Caesar accomplished more reforms than the Senate had in decades. He acted like a superhuman with boundless energy, attempting to fix every crack in this vast empire by himself. Many of his reforms were undoubtedly far-sighted and propelled history forward. The price of power, fear and conspiracy. However, the concentration of power inevitably breeds suspicion. The more efficient and omnipotent he became, the more he terrified those old nobilcan traditions. They saw that the Senate had become a mere formality, a rubber stamp applauding the dictator's decrees. Caesar's statues began to be placed alongside those of the gods in temples. He himself began to wear the purple toga of a triumphant general and sit on a golden chair, symbolizing power to receive senators. In the eyes of many, he was just a title away from being a king, Rex. And in the Roman Republic, king was a taboo word, equated with tyranny and slavery. Since the overthrow of the monarchy, 500 years prior to Othford of Tours, did Caesar truly want to be king? This is a question that has plagued historians for 2 millennia. We may never know his true intentions, but there is no doubt that his series of actions constantly tested the Roman people's tolerance for kingship. And his confidants too fanned the flames, attempting to pave the way for his ascent to the throne. On February 1544 BC, Rome was celebrating the traditional festival of Lupercalia. It was a festival filled with ancient, wild rituals. During the festivities, Caesar, dressed in purple, sat on his golden chair on the rostra. In the Roman Forum, watching the syllabus, his chief general, Mark Antony, who was then consul. Then, in silence, and under everyone's gaze, Antony held high a laurel wreath, symbolizing royalty, and attempted to crown Caesar. Caesar pushed the crown away. A scattered round of applause erupted from the crowd. Antony, undeterred, offered the crown to Caesar again, more earnestly, urging him to accept. Caesar, once more with a firmer attitude, pushed the crown away. This time, a thunderous, overwhelming applause and cheer erupted from the crowd. People rejoiced that their dictator had refused to be king. Caesar stood up and loudly declared, "I am not king. The only king of Rome is Jupiter." He ordered the crown to be sent to the temple of Juta. This offer of the crown spectacle has been interpreted by many historians as a carefully choreographed political performance. Caesar and Antony were likely conducting a public opinion test. They wanted to see if the Roman people were ready to accept a king, and the result of the test was clear. However, whether Caesar's intention was a genuine refusal or a strategic retreat, this event backfired. It did not dispel people's doubts. Instead, it further convinced the senators, who were already discontented with him, that Caesar's ambition to be king was now glaringly obvious. They believed it was merely a deceptive play staged by the dictator. Caesar's behavior also became increasingly monarchical. He began to disregard senatorial etiquette. On one occasion, when the entire Senate lined up to bestow yet another set of honors upon him, he remained seated, not rising to greet them. In Roman tradition, this was an act of extreme arrogance and disrespect. During the Republic, coins could only feature images of deities or long-dead ancestors. Minting the likeness of a living person on currency was a practice of Hellenistic monarchs in the East, a blatant symbol of kingship. Caesar seemed unaware, or perhaps he didn't care, that his actions were accumulating deadly hatred. He was engrossed in his grand vision of transforming the world and planning the future. He was planning an unprecedented eastern expedition to conquer Parthia, avenge Crassus, and wipe out the shame of Carrhae. He appointed all important officials for the coming years, as if he would rule forever. He pardoned almost all his enemies from the civil war, including Brutus and Cassius, and granted them high offices and ample rewards. He believed that clemency and forgiveness were enough to resolve all hatred. He even disbanded his Spanish guard, traveling in Rome, with only a few attendants. He underestimated the Roman nobles' almost obsessive adherence to the ideal of the Republic. He also underestimated human envy and fear. When law and political procedures could no longer restrain a man's power, another ancient method began to brew. In the Shalley, alliance, composed of his most trusted friends and his most pardoned enemies, was forming. They had a common goal, a goal they saw as immensely noble. To save the Republic, Caesar must die. Neca, the assassination. Et tu, Brute. The conspiracy to assassinate Caesar was led by two individuals, of very different temperaments but shared of Gaius. The first was Gaius Cassius Longinus. He was a staunch Republican who had sided with Pompey in the Civil War. After the Battle of Pharsalus, he was pardoned by Caesar, but his heart never truly submitted. He was gloomy and hot-tempered, harboring a deep-seated hatred for Caesar's personal dictatorship. He was the earliest initiator, but Cassius knew that his prestige alone was not enough to rally a sufficient number of people. He needed a more symbolic figure, a leader beyond reproach, morally. His gaze fell upon Marcus Junius Brutus. Brutus was an extremely complex character. His lineage seemed to be the embodiment of the Roman Republic's contradiction. His maternal line could be traced back to the legendary hero who overthrew the Roman monarchy and established the Republic. Lucius Junius Brutus. This burdened him with the destiny of a defender of the Republic from birth. However, his mother Servilia was Caesar's most beloved mistress throughout his life. Caesar had always treated Brutus like his own son, showing him great affection and care. After the Battle of Pharsalus, Caesar had ordered that Brutus not be harmed, and later granted him very high positions and honor. Brutus himself was an idealist, deeply influenced by Stoic philosophy. He was upright, scholarly, and enjoyed immense moral prestige in Rome. He struggled internally for a long time. On one side was Caesar's immense personal kindness to him. On the other was the republican ideal that he believed in above all else. Cassius and the other conspirators continuously pressured him. Roman citizens would leave notes on his praetor's chair reading, "Brutus, are you asleep?" and "Are you truly worthy of the name Brutus?" Ultimately, that bloodline-driven hatred of kings and the lofty ideal of saving the Republic overcame personal sentiment. Brutus joined the conspiracy and became the nominal leader of the group. His involvement acted like a magnet, attracting over 60 senators to join the assassination plot. Among them were staunch political enemies like Cassius, but also many who had been Caesar's trusted confidants, such as Decimus Brutus, one of the commanders of the 10th Legion. Their motivations for joining varied. Some were driven by ideals, others by envy, and some worried that Caesar's impending eastern expedition would further solidify his unshakable power. They set the date for the assassination as March 15, 44 G, Ides of March, in the Roman calendar. On that day, the Senate was to hold an important meeting to discuss granting Caesar the power to move troops within Italy in final preparation for his Parthian expedition. More importantly, there were rumors that on that day the Senate would formally propose declaring Caesar king of all Roman provinces in the east. The conspirators felt they could wait no long on the eve of the assassination. Omens of destruction seemed to come from all duress. Caesar was dining at Lepidus's house, and during the meal they discussed a philosophical question. "What kind of death is best?" Caesar answered without hesitation. "That which is sudden and unforeseen." That night, Caesar's wife, Calpurnia, had a terrifying nightmare. She dreamed that their house's roof collapsed, and Caesar, covered in blood, died in her arms. She awoke, crying, begging Caesar not to attend the Senate meeting the next day. Meanwhile, a group of workers, demolishing Caesar's father-in-law's old tomb, discovered an ancient stone tablet inscribed in Greek with a terrible prophecy, warning that when the tomb of Aeneas's descendant was opened, he would die at the hands of his own kin, and Rome would consequently suffer great disaster. The next morning, the priests sacrificing for Caesar also saw extremely ominous signs in the entrails of the vits. All the omens pointed to the same outcome. Caesar, the pragmatist, who usually disbelieved in gods and spirits, wavered in the face of his wife's tears and the ominous signs. He even decided to cancel the meeting for that day. However, the conspirators had already anticipated this. Decimus Brutus, one of Caesar's most trusted friends, personally came to Caesar's home. He scoffed at Caesar, saying, "Would the great Caesar truly listen to a woman's nightmare and a priest's gibberish?" He reminded Caesar that all the senators were prepared to bestow new honors upon him, and if he didn't go, it would be a great insult to the senators. Persuaded by Decimus, Caesar finally changed his mind. He decided to attend the meet on his way to Pompey's theater. A soothsayer named Spurina had previously warned him to beware the Ides of March. When Caesar met him again on the way, he half-jokingly said to the soothsayer, "See, the Ides of March has come, and I am still safe and sound." The soothsayer calmly replied, "Yes, Caesar, it has come, but it is not yet gone." Another Greek philosopher also tried to hand Caesar a scroll containing the full details of the conspiracy, but because there were too many people seeking an audience, Caesar merely held the life-saving papyrus with other documents, without having time to open it. Fate, it seemed, had closed all doors of escape. Caesar, propelled by a series of coincidences and inevitabilities, stepped by step into the death trap meticulously prepared for him. Nine, the enduring lessee. Caesar fell at the foot of Pompey's steps. The conspirators, holding their blood-stained daggers, cried out, liberty and republic, as they rushed out of the theater, believing the people would welcome them as liberated. But they were wrong. The streets of Rome were silent, followed by immense panic. Citizens bolted their doors. The conspirators killed Caesar the man, but they did not kill everything that the symbol Caesar represented. Nor did they have a clear plan for how to rebuild the Republic in the post-Caesar era. Their actions opened Pandora's box at Caesar's funeral. Mark Antony delivered a speech considered one of history's greatest examples of demagoguery. He first restrained himself, reading Caesar's will aloud. Caesar had permanently bequeathed his gardens by the Tiber to the Roman people and left a considerable sum of money to every city. The crowd began to stir. Then Antony pulled back the purple toga, covering Caesar's corpse, revealing the mutilated body covered in gruesome wounds. With a tone full of grief and indignation, he recounted Caesar's glorious military achievements for Rome, denouncing the assassin's treachery. The emotions of the Roman people were completely ignited. They transformed from citizens into vengeful mobs. Torch in hand, they rushed towards the homes of Brutus and Cassius, forcing the conspirators to flee Rome in haste. The assassins believed that by killing the king, they could save the Republic, but they precisely destroyed the Republic's last glimmer of hope. Caesar's death did not bring freedom. Instead, it triggered a civil war even more brutal and bloody than the last. And in this chaos, a new, more formidable character ascended the stage of history. He was Caesar's designated sole heir and adopted son, his 18-year-old great-nephew Gaius Octavius. This sickly young man, lacking political experience, possessed an unnervingly calm mind and superb political acumen beyond his years. He inherited Caesar's name and Caesar's most precious legacy. Over the next decade, Octavian, Antony, and Lepidus formed the second triumvirate. They first hunted down and eliminated all the assassins, including Brutus and Cassius. Then, in the inevitable Antedon, Antony and his lover, Queen Cleopatra of Egypt, at the Battle of Actium. In 27 BC, Octavian, Caesar's adopted son, finally accomplished what Caesar had not, or perhaps dared not accomplish. He accepted the title Augustus, meaning venerable, supreme, from the Senate, becoming Rome's first emperor. The Roman Republic, after a century of internal strife and struggle, finally met its end, a great era, which had lasted for nearly 500 years. Conclude. Epilogue. The immortal Caesar, through his legendary life, proved a cold truth to the world. When an institution's vitalities is exhausted, and its internal conflict with idealism can become the final straw that breaks it, the tide of history will ultimately sweep away all obstacles, rushing towards its destined arrest. Caesar himself never wore a crown, but after his death, his name, Caesar, and its later evolutions into Kaiser, German, and Tsar, Russian, became the most enduring synonyms for emperor in the Western world. In this way, he achieved immortality. Forever echoing through the corridors of history, Caesar died. He fell at the foot of Pompey's statue, beneath the daggers of those he had promoted and pardoned with his own hands. The assassins, those Republican nobles who styled themselves liberators, believed that with 23 stabs they could kill an era, could rewind the hands of history back to the Golden Age. They cherished, controlled by a small elite. They were wrong. They killed only Caesar the man. They could not kill the irreversible trend that Caesar represented. Caesar was a paratue. He was a ruthless conqueror. In 8 years in Gaul, he shed the blood of millions, reducing an independent civilization to a Roman prov but he was also a merciful victor. In the Civil War, he repeatedly pardoned his Roman compatriots. His clementia, clemency, became his most powerful political weapon and ultimately the sharpest dagger to pierce himself. He was a cunning populist demagogue, buying the favor of Rome's lower classes with bread and circuses, turning immense debt into steps toward power. But he was also a far-sighted reformer with the Julian calendar. He redefined time. With colonies, he settled veterans and spread civilization. With laws, he attempted to establish new order within the vast, crumbling body of the Republic. He was an ambitious man, a gambler, a man who unhesitatingly staked the entire world. But perhaps he was also the only one at the time who saw the Roman Republic's inevitable fate. That small city-state republic born on the Seven Hills. Its institutions, its laws, its spirit were designed to rule a city. When Rome's territory had expanded to encompass the entire Mediterranean, the corruption of the Senate, the greed of provincial governors, endless factionalism, and the collapse of the citizen-soldier system had already pronounced the Republic's death sentence. It needed not repair, but a complete reconstruction. It needed a strong central authority, an absolute power that could transcend all factional disputes. Caesar became the man chosen by history. He may not have had a clear plan to become king, but all his actions objectively paved the way for Rome's transition from a dysfunctional republic to an efficient empire. With his sword, he severed the republic's last decaying shackles, and with his death, he cleared the final obstacles for his successor. The assassins, those idealists, like Brutus, loved the concept of the republic more than they loved Rome itself. They believed that by eliminating the one who most resembled a king, they could save their idealized state. This was their greatest tragedy. They did not realize that what they were defending was no longer a vibrant system, but an empty, decaying corpse. Caesar's death did not bring freedom. It brought a more brutal civil war, the Second Triumvirate's more bloody proscription lists, and the complete exhaustion of the Republic's last vitality. Ultimately, it brought a successor more ruthless and cunning than Caesar. Octavian, who, under the guise of first citizen, wielded imperial power, finally establishing history, in an ironic way, completed its sight. So, how should we evaluate Caesar? Perhaps he was like the Rubicon River. He resolutely crossed. It was just an ordinary river, but at a specific historical juncture, it became a symbol, an irreversible choice, an eternal boundary marker. Behind him was a crumbling republic. Before him was an approaching, unified empire. He was the one who connected the past to the future, who destroyed the old world, and who laid the foundation for the new one. His name is no longer just a surname. It has become synonymous with power, transforming into emperor in European languages. Kaiser Czar. His story was dramatized by Shakespeare, performed on stages for centuries. His commentaries on the Gallic War remains essential reading for military strategists and Latin students. Today, he never wore a crown, yet he changed the course of Western history more profoundly than any crowned monarch. He, a mortal man, stood shoulder to shoulder with the gods, and ultimately, as a mortal man, this is Gaius Julius Caesar, a conqueror, a criminal, a savior, a destroyer, a man who can never be simply defined, and thus forever remembered by history. The immortal more.